Hidden in the mountains of Central Asia is a quiet town with a dangerous secret. On the surface, it looks harmless, but just above it sits something far more threatening than it appears. Built decades ago for a purpose long forgotten, this structure now holds a problem no one expected, and few can solve. Engineers say it's stable until it isn't, and when it fails, the effects won't stop at one place. This is the story of a dam that can't be fixed, and a risk that's been waiting in silence. A town built on uranium, Meilu was founded in 1946, at the very start of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was racing to catch up with the United States in nuclear weapons development. Uranium had suddenly become one of the most strategically important resources on Earth, and the mountains of Central Asia offered one of the USSR's few reliable domestic supplies. The discovery turned this remote region into a critical node in a global arms race that was unfolding at unprecedented speed, where scientific progress and military ambition were deeply intertwined. The town was built specifically to serve nearby uranium mines and a processing plant that converted raw ore into yellowcake, a concentrated uranium powder used as the first step in nuclear fuel and weapons production. Uranium from Meilu was used in the Soviet Union's first atomic bomb, detonated in 1949, placing the town at the very center of Soviet military power. For decades, its output quietly fed the nuclear stockpile that defined superpower rivalry. Because of its military importance, Meilu was a closed city. It did not appear on public maps, and access was tightly controlled by the state. Residents were not allowed to leave freely, and outsiders could not enter without special permission. Even mentioning the town's true purpose was considered a security risk. In return, residents received unusually high living standards, with good schools, modern hospitals, and steady employment. Privileges that masked the environmental cost already accumulating beneath the town. Beneath the promise of prosperity, a long-term danger was already being buried alongside the uranium itself. And the most dangerous part of that cost wasn't the uranium itself, but what was left behind, the problem no one wanted. Uranium mining does not end when the usable material is extracted. What remains is a toxic byproduct known as tailings, a mixture of crushed rock, heavy metals, and radioactive elements left after uranium ore is processed. These tailings still emit radiation and can remain hazardous for thousands of years, long after any economic benefit has disappeared. Unlike normal industrial waste, tailings continue to generate radioactive gases and contaminated water, making them a permanent environmental risk rather than a temporary one. In Meilu, the tailings were stored in large artificial reservoirs called tailings ponds, built along steep mountain slopes and riverbanks. Across the former Soviet Union, hundreds of similar sites were constructed rapidly during the Cold War, often with minimal environmental oversight and little understanding of long-term geological risks. The priority was speed and output, not safety or sustainability, and many of these ponds were placed in locations vulnerable to landslides, floods, and earthquakes. As long as these ponds are properly maintained, the waste remains relatively stable. But maintenance requires constant monitoring, engineering expertise, and funding. Dams must be reinforced, water levels controlled, and erosion prevented, all of which demand continuous investment over decades, even centuries. Once that system collapsed, the tailings became a problem no one wanted to claim responsibility for. Dangerous, invisible, and slowly growing more unstable with time. Local communities inherited sites they did not build and could not afford to manage, leaving them surrounded by radioactive material they had no means to contain or remove. What made it worse was that the people left behind had no power to stop what was already set in motion. Collapse of a system. In 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union transformed Central Asia overnight. Newly independent states like Kyrgyzstan inherited vast industrial systems they had never controlled, including dozens of abandoned uranium mines and radioactive waste sites scattered across their territory. These facilities were designed for a centralized empire, not small developing nations with limited budgets. The engineers, scientists, and administrators who once managed these facilities largely returned to Russia, taking critical expertise with them. What remained were underfunded local governments suddenly responsible for maintaining some of the most hazardous infrastructure on Earth, without training, equipment, or long-term planning frameworks. The financial reality was even harsher. Countries such as Tajikistan have reported managing multiple uranium legacy sites with annual budgets as low as tens of thousands of dollars, barely enough for basic inspections, let alone large-scale remediation or relocation projects. Mailu followed the same path, collapsing from a privileged industrial center into an impoverished town, left living beside decaying radioactive structures it lacked the resources to secure. Unemployment rose, services deteriorated, and environmental risks grew quietly in the background. And among all those decaying structures, one stood out as the most dangerous of all: the dam that is already failing. In 2023, engineers carried out a safety inspection of Tailings Pond 7 in Mailu following major earthquakes in the wider region. The goal was to assess whether the structure could withstand seismic stress, given its position directly above the town's main river and close to residential areas. They expected to find compacted, relatively dry material that had settled over decades. Instead, tests revealed a loose, waterlogged mass with almost no internal strength. The radioactive waste had remained saturated, behaving more like thick slurry than solid earth, making it highly mobile under pressure. This discovery was critical because it changed how the dam would respond to an earthquake. Rather than cracking in place, the tailings could surge forward as a flowing wave, pushing directly against the dam wall and overwhelming it within minutes. Computer models showed that even reinforcing the dam with a larger buttress would not prevent collapse. The internal structure of the waste itself was the problem, meaning the entire system was fundamentally unstable. And if that collapse happens, the damage won't stop at the edge of the town. The valley that feeds millions. The Fergana Valley is one of the most important agricultural regions in Central Asia, home to around 14 million people across Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. Surrounded by mountains, it contains the only large stretch of fertile, flat land in the region, making it essential for food production and economic stability. Entire national food systems depend on their soil and water. Its fertility depends on a network of rivers that flow down from the surrounding highlands. One of these is the Mailu River, which connects directly to the larger Sir Daria system that irrigates much of the valley's farmland and supplies water to cities and rural communities alike. If the dam at Tailings Pond 7 were to collapse, radioactive sludge would reach the valley within hours, spreading across riverbanks and into groundwater. Contaminants would move silently through irrigation channels, livestock fields, and drinking water supplies. While radiation levels would not cause immediate mass deaths, long-term exposure could increase cancer rates and permanently damage agriculture across a region that millions depend on for survival. The question isn't whether the risk is real, it's whether anyone can remove it safely. The last and riskiest option. With the dam beyond repair, the only remaining option is to remove the radioactive waste entirely. In Mailu, this means relocating nearly 900,000 cubic meters of tailings from Pond 7 to a more stable site known as Tailings Pond 15, located several kilometers away. It's a massive operation involving years of work and constant exposure to hazardous material. The process is simple in theory, but dangerous in practice. Thousands of truckloads of radioactive waste must travel along narrow, poorly maintained mountain roads, often winding along cliffs and river valleys. Each journey increases the risk of accidents, spills, and direct contamination of nearby rivers, villages, and ecosystems that depend on those water sources. These risks are not hypothetical. In 2024, two separate truck crashes at another Kyrgyz uranium site, Minkush, released radioactive waste into a ravine and a river, both caused by driver error. In both incidents, emergency teams struggled to contain the spread, highlighting how fragile the safety systems really are. The relocation project is expected to cost around $17 million, far more than reinforcing the dam would have been, but now the only realistic path left to prevent a regional environmental disaster. In trying to avoid one catastrophe, the region is forced to gamble with another. Mailu is more than a forgotten Soviet town. It's proof that the consequences of the Cold War are still unfolding today. A single unstable dam now threatens the health, economy, and future of millions who had no role in creating the problem. The story shows how environmental dangers don't disappear when political systems collapse. They simply get passed on. If you found this story valuable, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden global risks. Watch the next video on your screen to keep exploring.